Welcome to Energy Unplugged, the go-to podcast focusing on the global energy transition. I'm Richard Howard, I'm the Global Research Director at Aurora Energy Research. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Helen Clarkson, CEO of Climate Group, which is a leading international non-profit organisation driving climate action fast through powerful coalitions of businesses and governments. This release of the podcast is intentionally timed to coincide with Climate Week NYC, which is Climate Group's flagship event of the year and brings together many stakeholders from all around the world and businesses as well. Helen Clarkson has over 20 years of experience in climate and humanitarian work, spanning government, corporate engagement and NGOs. She led Climate Group since 2017 and has been building influential initiatives, many of which are very well known, like RE100, EV100, SteelZero, and the Under2 Coalition. She's been awarded an OBE in 2022 for services to climate and was named in the Independent's Climate 100 list in 2024. So Helen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So Helen, we could talk about many things, as I think your organisation is involved in many parts of the energy transition. I'm particularly keen to explore how Climate Group is shaping the global climate agenda, and we can talk about the event this week as well. And also pick up on kind of the role of coalition building that you're very much at the centre of, and in particular how you build coalitions of corporates in driving climate action. But maybe let's just start with the big picture sort of scene setting. Your organisation's mission is to drive climate action fast, as I said already. So specifically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but aiming to halve emissions by 2030, get to net zero emissions by 2050, as well as achieving greater prosperity for all. In my view, like obviously a very laudable set of goals, but I would probably say extremely challenging to achieve that rate of change. I was looking at data only in the last couple of days, and we're sort of only now reaching a turning point for global greenhouse gas emissions sort of flatlining in the last couple of years. And in the power sector specifically, we may have just reached the turning point this year. But what gives you hope we can get to that goal of halving emissions as soon as 2030?
Thanks. Yeah, so it is an ambitious goal, and I think it's really important in climate that we set those ambitious goals that are in line with the science. And so the challenge we're getting is, as you say, as we get towards 2030 and emissions need to be coming down, it's getting increasingly challenging, but that is what the science tells us that we need to do or be on track on. And I think it's important to set those goals in an ambitious way and then push everyone, rather than just sort of pretend like, oh, well, if we just go for, sorry, put it another way, people sort of talk about as though you might be able to kind of pick a number like 2.5 degrees C or 2.4 or 2. And be so kind of specific that you can kind of fine tune things like that. And that's just not how it works. So you've got to go for those most ambitious emissions cuts in order to have a chance of getting anywhere near really 2 degrees or under. And so that's what sets the ambition. I think there is hope in bits of the world, and I'm sure we'll go into where there is and isn't hope, but the speed of change we're seeing, particularly from China and across Asia, is where I look to when I want to sort of feel a bit more hopeful. There's a book by Bill McKibben, who's always been a brilliant writer on this stuff, called Here Comes the Sun. And that has got a lot about the solar boom and what that is doing and how that is going to change things. And I think that is where we need to look to if we want to feel hopeful about this. Because the other thing I think about the energy transition is, the word transition sounds kind of quite smooth and easy, but it is going to be there's going to be discontinuity and it's going to be bumpy. I think the way that the world has gone about decarbonising has left it very, very late, means that those bumps are going to be bigger. But I think we're going to start to see things like, as EVs really do displace combustion engines, which they're doing in Asia already, that is going to change the shape of global oil demand. And that is going to lead to some big economic bumps. But from an emissions point of view, that will be positive. So I think what's getting harder is to be hopeful that we can do all this in a kind of nice, easy way, and there won't be too much pain. I think we are in for a painful period, and part of our job as activists as well is to try and push that paint to land in the right places, as it were.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, looking at the data, which is what I spend quite a bit of my time doing, I completely agree with you. Solar boom is, I mean, it's coming. It's come. It's extraordinary how fast the solar capacity additions have been in the last few years, and projections for the future are. It is extraordinary and beyond probably what anyone could have realistically expected. Cost reductions continue to fly. So that's all great. However, in a sort of glass, I don't want to be a pessimist too much in the conversation, but glass more half empty view, we're only now getting to the point where just within the power sector, renewables become the main source, like slightly overtaking coal, which coal's kind of flatlining a bit. This is all global numbers, but we're just getting to that. And I think what I've seen, or fast forwarding, if you look at some of the individual power markets where we see much higher levels of renewables penetration, it actually brings a whole heap of challenges that need to be wrestled with around, if you look at systems such as, I don't know, Iberia, just as an example, very high levels of wind and solar penetration, and leading to extreme prices, lots of negative prices, a collapse in the business case for solar, to some extent, and batteries partly providing a solution, more resilience, but still then blackout periods earlier this year. It's not easy even within the power sector, which is so, supposedly the easy bit.
Yeah.
So I suppose it kind of brings me to a question. If you think about those goals for 2030 and even beyond towards net zero, what are the biggest risks or blind spots that you see of the kind of the bits that people aren't talking about? Like everyone talks about solar,
I think what you were talking about there, and what I often kind of say that we're really interested in, is I probably should have a better word for it because is the plumbing, right? And it's not plumbing,
yeah,
obviously, but it's if we, when you talk to our members about what the big issues are, it is around affordability, availability, all that sort of stuff. But it's just, how are you going to get these things onto the grid? And everywhere you go around the world, those issues keep coming out over and over again. And a lot of the barriers are regulatory. And so there can be investment that is pent up and ready to go, but regulation stops you. So an example that I bring up a lot, because it's just quite easy to understand why this is a problem. South Korea, we work with a lot of companies in South Korea. They're committed to 100% renewable electricity, and those are South Korean headquartered companies as well as international companies with a presence there. In South Korea, something like more than 50% of local governments have ordinances in them that say that solar has to be located at this minimum distance from residential areas and roads. And those can be distances up to like 500 meters to a kilometer. And if you think about how solar is taking off in the rest of the world, and some really exciting stuff happening in Pakistan at the moment, with essentially solar going onto people's rooftops and balconies, totally self-installed. Having an ordinance says that you can't put solar near residential automatically cuts out the amount of solar that you can have. Now, in theory, that should be quite an easy regulation to get rid of. And we're doing a lot of work in South Korea at the moment and pushing quite hard on those sorts of policy changes. And if you can get that policy change, you should then see the investment coming. So again, it isn't a straightforward thing. In the UK, I was on something a little while ago, and just hearing about the number of projects that are queued up to get on the interconnector. So I think you're right. The technology is there, but how you get those onto the grid, that is the problem. And then you sort of face, things like NIMBYism and, blah, 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 which again, I think one of the frustrating things to me is that in a lot of places, it does feel like the barrier for that is higher for renewables than, you don't hear loads of objections to planning permission for, I don't know, petrol stations or something, or, and you never, because it was a whole big thing a few years ago about, well, a wind farm at the end of its life, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, people don't seem to sit around and worry about oil rigs. So there does seem to be a kind of different standards that are set, and somehow a belief that the renewables have to be, purer than than snow on every single thing. We deal with these things in our economy all the time, but it's because we've kind of got this sense of like, oh, well, it's an alternative and we could just ignore it
Yeah.
and everything will go away. And that's not right. So it's I think what lies ahead is this periods of like, oh, we need to do this stuff, but how do you do it in an ordered way is going to be the problem.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with you. The planning side, yeah, completely agree. It's not been the
And
easiest
it's not just the
thing to
UK
get through.
either. I think
Yeah,
sometimes we think
absolutely.
these are like UK issues, but it's everywhere
Yeah.
you go, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like in a lot of places, more sensible decisions are being made around that. And there's always going to need to have some kind of balance there of not build anything everywhere without any consideration. For example, offshore wind, that you do need to have some consideration of impact
Yeah.
on birds and marine mammals and so forth. So it's not there shouldn't be any planning rules, and I think we are seeing a more sensible balance towards enabling
Mm.
there. The bit that we see in Aurora as being like beyond the planning, the actual grid, like what you described as plumbing, but maybe a different word of system integration, is
Mm.
a very complex and thorny issue. And in general, and it's an area where we do more and more and more work to try and understand what is the impact of bringing more projects onto the system? Why is there such a queue of projects? What's the impact of this on curtailment and the impact of that
Mm.
on business cases? And it's sort of far from straightforward. And as a general observation across all the different markets we look at globally, in general, that is getting worse, not better. As
Mm.
sort of obviously lots of work to enable the renewables to be built and to be invested, but the actual grid system integration piece is actually lagging significantly
Yeah.
behind, often because the sort of TSOs they're kind of moving towards this and are accelerating, but there's in many cases a bit of a they're a little bit behind anyway on modernizing the grid and making sure we've got enough of it. And then renewables are coming so fast at timescales that grid companies can't really
Yeah.
sort of match in a sense. So that is actually getting quite a bit worse in a lot of markets.
And it's going to be the same everywhere. It's where the kind of public and private domains hit, and we always know
Yeah.
that is where you get a lot of friction, even if you had all the time in the world to make this change. So yeah, yeah.
Well, and actually that brings me sort of to the next bit I wanted to ask you really about. You talk about the sort of bringing together of business and government, and these stuff has got to work as an economic activity, but there's also rules and regulations around. That's kind of where your organization potentially can and does operate to sort of
Mm.
grease the wheels of that. Can you tell us a bit more about what makes your approach unique, and particularly sort of the work you do around coalition building, which is extensive?
Yeah. So, and we sort of started to touch on it a bit there. We work with companies and governments in large networks which have commitments at the center. And so they're always an ambitious commitment. So you mentioned RE100. That's a commitment to 100% renewable electricity globally. And EV100 commitment to 100% zero emission vehicles in fleets, and then it has a charging kind of component alongside. So for all our different commitment campaigns, ambitious commitment that's made, setting it at 100%. So I always used to say about RE100, if previously you could have said that a 95% target was really ambitious, but everyone in the company would think they're in that 5%, and so
Yeah.
nothing changes. So you have to set it out there at 100% or zero for, SteelZero and things like that. And then what we do is we get the companies to report each year on their progress. And what we're trying to do there, it's not sort of using reporting. I don't think reporting is a very strong change mechanism in itself. It reminds companies they need to keep acting, but it's really about understanding from that reporting data, less about what each individual company is doing, because again, you don't expect the company on a journey to 100% will have like a linear journey and you should see it moving by X% a year. It will have discontinuities again, like you might do a big capital expenditure one year and then nothing for the next couple. So we're looking to see, are they on track? Are they still moving? Is the data broadly moving in the right direction? What's that telling you? But actually, we're looking for those trends, and particularly where we can see there are certain geographies where things aren't moving, and that will then drive us to go and do policy work in those countries. So South Korea, which I was just talking about, that's an example of when we did our reporting for RE100, we said, where are the geographies where you really struggle to buy renewable electricity? that threw out then a kind of the top 10 countries that we could go and focus on, and sort of doing in-depth policy work in about 5 or 6 of those now. And then what you can do is in the country itself, that sort of, I think there's 400 plus companies now committed to RE100, or over 450, I think. That number's semi-interesting in itself, but actually to be able to go to a country and say there's 100 or so companies here that are ready to buy renewable electricity, but XYZ regulation that you have on the books is stopping that happening. That's a much more powerful engagement process. And in each of those countries where we're doing in-depth work, we'll have local partners who are the kind of local policy experts and know how to do the lobbying. So we're not pretending that we can just like turn up here, from the UK and think, we think you should do that. So it's very much working in local partnerships, but bringing that evidence from this big global coalition. So that's how we work. And then the Under2, which you mentioned, is a network of subnational governments. So that's the level of government that sort of comes underneath federal kind of national government, but is bigger than cities. So, and that really varies country to country. And not every country kind of has that. But, in the US, it would be the states, China, it's the provinces. In the UK, we have Scotland and Wales, and they're both members. England doesn't really have the equivalent body. Australia, we've got, I think, basically all the US states are signed up. So in each place, and particularly in federal structures, those states will have a lot of power, and they are that bit nearer to the people. And so they'll have powers that they can use. And so we work with that level of government. They're all committed to net zero by 2050. And we do a lot with them, again, about acceleration. So what can Minnesota learn from Baden-Württemberg in Germany, as an example? So we bring them together on kind of very thematic projects, again, to try and accelerate action. And where possible, we bring the businesses and the governments together.
On the returning to sort of the business side, do you get the feeling companies are moving fast enough? And here I'm sort of interested, like there might be some sort of very enthusiastic companies that engage extensively with your initiatives, but industry in general, is it moving fast enough? Are they the leaders or the laggards?
Companies are moving faster than governments. I think I don't think anyone is really moving fast enough anywhere. I think human nature is always to kind of probably to think if one closed one's eyes, it might all go away. But that idea that tomorrow looks like today is always quite appealing. But companies, I think, are moving faster than governments. And so another thing that we try and do is to sort of bring companies to governments and say, look, we want this. It's really weird because I think there's always a running assumption that companies hate regulation, and that's just not true. What they want is a level playing field. So for most companies are interested in energy regulation that allows them to get on with their other business, whatever their other business happens to be. So if you're a kind of manufacturer, I did work years and years ago with Nike, which was to do with the discharge of waste into water streams in Asia, which was a big thing that was happening with all the men. And they're like, look, we don't compete with Adidas on who, how much dye ends up in water streams. We compete on design. So there is a sort of pre-competitive space where companies who often share the same supply chains, that are present in the same places, can actually collaborate and can learn from one another and move things along. And so I think it's always looking for that pre-competitive space, and so I think that's why companies are moving faster. They have a license to operate issue. And a lot of companies know that electricity, carbon will be scarce in the future, and therefore how they power their processes is going to be absolutely important. So getting ahead of that now is important. And I think all those benefits of renewable energy, for example, kind of cheap, plentiful, particularly things where you can do sort of on-site generation, whatever, that's all got such strong business case, particularly as the prices come down. A lot of businesses will be attuned to what grids are doing, but there's that other side of it where, for companies, some of that is absolute no-brainer stuff, but they want to just get on with it, basically.
Yeah. One bit of that I'm kind of keen to deep dive a bit further, like one of your other coalitions I'm aware of. So the 24/7
Yeah.
carbon free coalition, and which maybe you could explain in a moment. But to me, this one seems really interesting, especially in the context of the massive growth in data centers and tech companies in this sort of space, talking about 24/7 clean power. Could you just tell us a bit more about that particular coalition? Kind of why is it important for business, and where have you got to on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, that's really like the next frontier in electricity procurement. So it's the next big topic that's coming. So at the moment, if you're sourcing 100% renewable electricity, you can close there's kind of on site, there's what the grid's doing, but you can close that gap with energy certificates. And they have to be, there's loads of rules and regulations around what you can use, and we have technical criteria and a lot of complexity around it. So they have to be high quality, but you can do it on a kind of annualized basis. So you can say, well, this is the kind of residual that we have in the year, and then we'll buy certificates, and that will close the gap to 100% within that framework. 24/7 is about matching on an hourly basis. So it's a huge shift from a kind of annualized to actually hourly, and using carbon-free sources so every hour of the day from local sources. So it's a big shift. It is looking like that is where the greenhouse gas protocol is going to go, and there's a big consultation happening on that this autumn, and that is going to shift how companies have to source those energies. So there's a first mover advantage around looking at that now and trying to get out ahead of it. And so this is it is a very leading coalition coming together to try and understand how you do that and really get into kind of the data that you need to do it.
Yeah.
It's going to drive huge energy efficiency, or it should, because you're going to want to save as much as you can in order to get that number down. So we are seeing a lot of interest from leaders across different geographies and industries, not just big tech, although we've done a lot of work with Google on this, and they're sort of leading the charge really. But we're also in early into the coalition at AstraZeneca and AirTrunk as well. So different companies coming together, and it's going to be, I think, the next big thing over the next year.
Yeah, no, I do think that topic's super interesting. Again, I love the ambition, but as a sort of modeler and analyst, I see a lot of challenges there. We did a piece of this. It'd be good to get your take, but we did a piece looking at data centers earlier this year, where just data center as a kind of asset type and an off-takers type, and tried to look at how we actually didn't even try and do 100% 24/7 because we thought it might be impossible. Depends on what mix of renewable technologies you've got. But if you've only got wind and solar, not hydro or something more flexible, it's very difficult, because it's kind of, how do you answer the question, where are you getting those electrons from in those hours where it's dark and windless, the Kälte Dunkelflaute, as they call it in German. That's the kind of age-old question for power systems in general. And when you go down to the microcosm of any individual off-taker, it gets more extreme, because you can't kind of socialize the issue. So what we sort of came to the conclusion that 100% 24/7 is very challenging without a lot of flexibility in there, and ideally sort of a renewable or low carbon form of flexibility. Could be hydro, could be batteries. But in the data center space, especially, the energy part of a data center is kind of, it's not their main business, right? They're selling the compute, and they sell it for a lot of money. So that their focus on uptime, kind of 99.999% uptime, and all this kind of stuff, that mentality in that space drives them towards, well, we want it to be green as possible, but not if it destroys our business case and value proposition to clients. So I do I think it's brilliant that people are exploring this. It's going to be interesting one, but I do see quite some challenges to actually get there fully, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I know there will be, and hydro and others are in there for the reasons you said, and it is carbon-free energy, and we're going to have to see how it evolves. But I think that's how we're going to get progress on these things, is by having leaders out there exploring it, understanding it. We've published the first set of technical criteria, so a kind of framework around it, and that hadn't been done before. So it's also getting companies in there to be part of shaping that conversation and building out understanding. So we're looking forward to any companies that want to come on that journey with us are welcome, because I think it is really critical. I appreciate what you're saying with the modeling, and then it's like, okay, how do we actually bring that alive and
Yep.
understand what that means? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. How do you overcome that? What's the
yeah.
next step in thinking? No, absolutely. I'm not saying it's impossible, but
No, no,
it's
it's fine.
definitely in the challenging
We know
camp.
there's quite
Yeah.
it's a hill to climb, but yeah.
Yeah, no, cool. I'll have to read that paper of yours and maybe share the analysis we've done. Conscious, so we're launching this podcast in Climate Week NYC. That's
Yeah.
as I mentioned, your like a big moment in your calendar of the year, and shaping the global conversation. What are the big themes in this year's event?
Yeah, so the kind of strap line, we always come up with an overarching theme. And this year it's Power On, which has many meanings, but it is about that kind of need to continue. There's obviously a lot of headwinds at the moment on climate action, not least in the US itself, where obviously domestically we've seen legislation come out, which is going to hamper progress. That's putting it sort of politely. And so, but there's, as I said, there's lots of companies that are committed there. There's a lot of people committed there. Actually, if you poll people, they want action on climate. And so we have to figure out both at the domestic, how does the US keep going? But actually, it's Climate Week NYC sits alongside UNGA, and it is a global event. And so it's also how the rest of the world keeps going. A lot of that momentum in the rest of the world will continue anyway. We talked about Asia already, and I think what we're seeing in China is just unstoppable now. I mean, China's clearly betting the future economy of being the big provider on all
Yeah, I
of this
agree.
stuff. So really, yeah, looking thematically at topics such as, I think there's a panel called Rising Asia, and how does the rest of the world kind of plug into that and understand it, as well as sort of tackling some of those more domestic points. So yeah, it should be a good week. There's a lot of interest. Obviously at the start of the year, we work on this pretty much all year round, or a team within the organisation does. And you're sort of thinking, okay, what is this going to look and feel like? But actually, as we get towards it, there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm. People want to have these conversations. So I think it's going to be a good week.
And how would you characterize or contrast the discussions in Climate Week NYC versus like the COP events that also bring together lots of different parties?
Well, it's easier to get a hotel at NYC. I'd start there. The COP this year is beset by these logistical questions, which is a shame because it's a really important COP. There isn't a political outcome that you're aiming for at Climate Week, so in a way that gives it a bit more freedom. It's always that moment before COP where you can start to feel the kind of COP conversation come together, and obviously there's a big topic around the absence of many of the NDCs, which were due to be out by now and certainly by COP. And so I think we're going to see a big push from UNGA during the couple of weeks on getting these NDCs and getting them across the line. So, but the big difference is, much more civil society in one place, having those conversations and trying to feed that into those kind of last few weeks of prep for the COP. So it's
Yeah.
often the kind of maybe, I haven't called it this before, but maybe we could call it the green room for the COP.
Yeah. So pre-COP.
Yeah.
Yeah, good COP. Good. No, and I hope it goes well. It's a successful event. As we sort of start to wrap up the conversation, which has been fascinating, I'm actually interested in your broader experience, because you, like, prior to your current role, you've worked in loads of different really interesting but more diverse spaces across humanitarian missions, corporate sustainability, and now you're very sort of deep in the climate space. But what has shaped your perspective most, and what do you bring from those earlier previous roles into your current role?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually really doing that humanitarian work did really shape me. So that is what I wanted to do when I left university. But my degree was in philosophy, which is not like the greatest gift to the humanitarian space. So I then went off and was like trained as an accountant for a few years just to have a skill. I thought it'd be good to have a skill, and started humanitarian work on the finance side, but then moved quite quickly into kind of logistics and project management and running projects in the field. And that term, the field, but so it was places like Congo and Sudan. I was pretty remote, and Congo was still very active war zone when I was there, and it sort of has stayed with me around what I wanted to then do with my career, which was really to get upstream of those problems and think about how a lot of what we're doing in the rest of the world, it is all connected.
Yeah.
And it kind of came home for me a lot in the Congo, just seeing this link between particularly women's health and war and the environment. That was very, very interconnected. You know, how well the rains went had a direct impact on people's health. So then it's been a process of kind of getting upstream of that and thinking, you know, what's my role in, we're never going to prevent the ills of the world, but like how are these things all linked together? And it's taken me into that more kind of environmental side, but really with that eye on people. And so for me, I think the kind of the linkage of all of it is about people, both how we cause these things, but those that are downstream of the problems, but that, you know, institutions and laws and all these things are created by the people who run them. And that's where I kind of think my interest has always lain, really, is yeah, on the weirdly on the social side, but kind of as a
Yeah.
consequence of our environmental impact.
No, it's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah, I've
That's where
always,
the philosophy
yeah,
training has come in.
yeah, good. It's
It all
yeah,
ties
yeah,
together in
very,
the
very underpins it, and yeah, I like that concept of going upstream to get at the heart of the issues. I'm gonna do a couple of quick fire questions. What's what's one key lesson you've learned about driving change at that global scale?
I mean, it actually is very linked to that last one. It is about people in the end. And so actually kind of meeting people where they are to some extent, or understanding where people are and not thinking that institutions are separate from the people that run them. So if you can kind of make that connection or linkage or sort of understand the human motivation, I think that's, you know, that is much more powerful than a report. Sorry for all the report writers out there, but you know, we need all that data, we need all that information, but we have to figure out the people behind it. And I think the climate movement has got that wrong a bit over the years, and I think that the next kind of interesting. Sorry, this isn't a quick fire answer to your quick fire
No, no,
question,
it's good. It's
but
a very
I
interesting answer.
think that we haven't always got that right, and
Mm,
you know, we're very guilty of kind of trying to convince people via the medium of the next graph that we've got. And it's
yeah,
no, you know, how do you link back to protection? And you know, we love the planet. You know, why are we not trying to protect it into the future? So yeah,
yeah. I mean, as a reflection, as an analyst, yeah, I think something we try and do in Aurora is like, yes, there's a lot of numbers. We're producing half hourly or 5 minutely data going out to 2060. That's a lot of data.
yeah,
Nodal forecast, it's a huge amount of data, but it's how you tell a story with that and
yeah,
connect it. In our case, it's not so much about the individual, like the human, the individual consumer. It's more about the individual investment case, the individual developer.
yeah,
Like, what does it mean for them? That's the bit that we're doing. So it's a slightly
yeah.
different bit, but it
It's
is
interesting,
about
and
how you tell a
like
story.
just as an example, you know, you can read all these stats about, and I talk a lot about, you know, EVs coming out of electric vehicles coming out of China, and the numbers are
Yeah,
insane, you know, the
yeah,
percentages, and you, but for me, the bit that hit home, and I'd seen all the graphs, and I'm like, know that they're big in the UK now and stuff, but last year I was trying to buy, I mean, a second-hand but electric car, and I went for a test drive and was just chatting to the guy from the dealership, and I was like, you know, asking him about electric cars and how they're going. And he's like, everyone loves BYD. No one had heard of them 2 years ago. And he just went on this whole kind of tear about the quality of electric vehicles and his experience of selling them. And to me, that brought it home much more than, you know, oh, this is real. This is like, you
yeah.
know, this big shift in the electric vehicle market is happening right in front of us. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and in a lot of the energy companies I sort of talk to, work with, a big part of a different implication of what you're saying is rather than doing something because they have to or they're being told, it's like how can they make it into a proposition for their end consumers that they really love, and it just kind of
Yeah.
drives itself. So EVs, I mean, they are just cool. I've got one,
Yeah.
I've had one a while, and it's the best car I've ever had. You know, it's
Yeah.
tremendous. It's not only because it's electric, it's just because it's a really nice, you know, it's a good car.
Yeah.
So it and sometimes you sort of struggle a bit with that, like early days of heat pumps. It's kind of you've not actually made it a really compelling proposition for
Right.
customers. You just
Yeah.
tried to ram it down their throat and tell them they have to do
it
it.
it
So
it
yeah,
it's hard to feel the warmth towards the heat pump that one feels towards an electric. I mean, because you're right, it's
yeah,
just I feel nice driving around an electric car. It
yeah,
feels good, but yeah,
exactly. So from the business perspective, it's kind of like how do you make it compelling?
yeah.
Final question, and then let's wrap up. if you could wave your magic wand and at the Climate Week or COP get one thing over the line, like change one thing, a business to do something, a government to do something, what would that thing be?
Well, if you had a magic wand, it would be get the US back into Paris. I think being realistic, I mean, if I've got a realistic magic wand, I think at some point China is going to publish an NDC which reflects what it's actually doing in the market. And I will never understand Chinese political thinking or the tactics. I think they could put out a really powerful NDC this year, which sort of just sets the direction for the years to come, which says, look, we are going at an extremely strong pace. Now, politically, they may not end up doing it this time. They might wait till next time. Again, I'm not in the mindset, but that would be my magic one, because I think if China, when it publishes that will shift hugely things like coal and other markets. So that'd be what I would do.
No, I'd agree. Like, China's such a huge player in all this. They literally are, the likelihood we get to 2 degrees or even below, a lot of it rests on China, a lot of it rests on India, wider Asia. That's where a lot of the action is, but especially China. And so I'd agree. That is where the action is.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Hope the Climate Week is a great success. And been fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you.
That was Helen Clarkson, CEO of Climate Group, talking to Richard Howard, Aurora's Global Research Director. Thanks for listening to Energy Unplugged. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to follow the podcast via whatever platform you use.